I'm Jed Rose. I'm director of the Center for Nicotine and Smoking Cessation Research at Duke University Medical Center. Our mission is to better understand tobacco addiction and to develop treatments that enable smokers to kick their addiction to cigarettes more effectively. Current treatments, unfortunately, have a rather low long-term success rate. So nicotine patch, nicotine gum, other forms of nicotine replacement generally yield about 10% success in the long run. The prescription aids, Chantix and Zyban, are approximately the same, and so we've been looking at ways to try to increase the success rates with smoking cessation treatment using personalized and adaptive treatment approaches. So personalized meaning to tailor the treatment to the individual smoker based on either their genetic or other characteristics, and then adaptive treatment, which changes the treatment depending on how the smoker is responding in terms of early markers of success or failure. I was recently at a meeting a week ago in Toronto of the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, presenting the results from our latest study. And in that study, we started smokers who wanted to quit on a nicotine patch. We tailored the dose of the patch depending on how heavy of a smoker they were. So they would either wear one patch giving a standard dose of 21 milligrams of nicotine a day, which replaces about the nicotine of a pack of cigarettes smoked daily. But for the heavy smokers, they started wearing 2 patches a day. Now, they started wearing patches even as they continued to smoke for a 2-week period, because in previous research we found that starting the patch before the quit date improves success rates. Smokers, while smoking on the patch, will reduce their smoking often, and in previous research, the people who spontaneously reduce their smoking the most turn out to have the best success rates when they reach their target quit date and quit smoking entirely. So in this study we measured carbon monoxide, which is an index of how much they're smoking, after 1 week of wearing their nicotine patches. For smokers whose carbon monoxide levels fell by more than 50%, indicative of a substantial decrease in smoking, we let them stay on the patch because they had a very good chance of succeeding in quitting smoking. In fact, their success rates were over 50%, which is very high in this field, and that was end of treatment at weeks 9 through 12 after their quit date. For the smokers, on the other hand, who did not show an immediate reduction in their smoking on that first week while wearing nicotine patches, we randomized those smokers to 3 different treatments. One treatment was to switch them to varenicline or Chantix. The other was to augment their nicotine patch with bupropion or Zyban. The FDA allows Zyban to be used with a patch, whereas with Chantix they have not approved the combination. So that's why we switched people to Chantix, or in the case of the second treatment, added Zyban on top of the patch. And then the third group was randomized to just staying on the same nicotine patch treatment that they were already on. These treatments were given double-blind, so everybody wore patches and took pills and capsules, but in some cases they received active patches and pills, in other cases placebo. Well, we found once again that the smokers who did not show an early response to the patch in the first week in terms of greatly reducing their smoking and carbon monoxide levels, if they were left on the patch, they had a very low success rate, less than 10%. However, for those smokers who did not respond initially to the patch and who were switched either to Chantix or received augmentation of their treatment by the addition of the Zyban, they did substantially better. We rescued, so to speak, about 15% of them who would have otherwise almost certainly failed if left on the patch by being switched to one or the other rescue treatment. So that illustrates the adaptive nature of the treatment, is to start people on the nicotine patch, which is the safest, most well-tolerated treatment along with other kinds of nicotine replacement. And then, depending on the early marker of smoking reduction, measured by the carbon monoxide in this study, if we identify people who are almost certain to fail, at that point, then we bring in the potential rescue treatments in the form of the prescription pharmaceuticals. It makes sense, we feel, to start people on the nicotine patch, again, because it's very safe and well tolerated, and then bring in the prescription aids, which, while generally safe, do have the potential of rare but serious side effects, adverse reactions, as a rescue treatment if people are not responding well to the nicotine replacement initially. The second aspect of the study, aside from adapting the treatment based on the early markers of response to the nicotine patch, was to try to determine whether the genetic genetic constitution of people would also predict their outcome. Previously, with colleagues at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Dr. George Uhl and colleagues, we've identified genetic markers that do predict how likely it is that someone will succeed in quitting smoking. There were 12,000 markers that were identified out of 1 million markers on the genome that we examined in the previous work. And we used the information from those 12,000 markers to come up with a single score, which we call a quit success score. And this was obtained by adding up or averaging the favorable or unfavorable markers at each of these 12,000 locations. So someone who had the favorable version of the gene more likely to predict success would receive a higher score than someone who would have less favorable markers at these locations. But it was a single number, a single score derived from these many genetic markers. And we've found also that this genetic score predicted success in the study where we used the adaptive treatment change. And the predictiveness of this score added to the predictiveness of their smoking reduction while on the patch in terms of adding more information to allow us to gauge who's more likely to succeed. So ultimately what we hope to do is to put together the information from the genetics, other information about the person's age, gender, smoking habits, and so forth, in order to not only predict how likely they are to succeed, but to determine whether a specific treatment is more likely to work for one person than another, and incorporate that into an adaptive treatment strategy that alters treatment depending on how smokers are responding. We're now launching a follow-up study in which one of the potential rescue treatments for smokers who don't respond in terms of smoking reduction to the patch will be the combination of varenicline and bupropion, Chantix, and Zyban, because some work suggests that since these two different agents act by different mechanisms, that adding both treatments could further enhance success rates. And again, our strategy will be to apply that kind of intensive pharmacologic treatment to the people who don't respond initially in terms of a favorable response to nicotine patch. So in this way, hopefully, step by step, we will be developing more and more effective treatments that enable smokers to quit and remain abstinent, because previous studies have shown that if a smoker does quit, they will reduce their chances of dying from smoking-related diseases from a 50% chance. Smokers have about a 50% chance of dying of disease from their smoking. But if they quit smoking, depending on how young or old they are when they quit, on average they lose about half of that excess risk, and therefore will be more likely to live a longer and healthier life.